everyone. Welcome to today's Scale Up series. My name is Emily Sprenger. I'm a graduate learning specialist at National University. And I'm very excited that a member of our career services team is coming back, I should say, to present. Tonight, we're going to be discussing elevate your interview skills to get the job. And we are recording our session today. We would absolutely like you to have questions in the Q&A. Please feel free to utilize the chat to have conversation and ask some questions. We do have some other members of our career service team here as well, so they may be addressing some of those questions in the chat as we move along. And just two more things. Dr. Vaartstra, who has come to present tonight, has mentioned that so kindly that he will provide me a copy of the PDF of today's session and then just some additional handouts. So I will go ahead and email that to all of our registrants. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce everyone to Dr. Matt Vaartstra.
Thank you, Emily, and welcome in, everybody. Thank you to the Graduate Studies Support Center for asking us back to speak again at the Skill Up series from Career Services. I'm excited to be here and share a little bit more with you all about kind of interview skills. We talked about kind of resumes a month or two ago when I presented here, and so I'm excited to take that kind of to the next level. And so I'll give a quick shout out to my career services team. There are some of them here that can address a little questions on the way as we go. But all of the presentation materials that I'm presenting today, a lot of the topics that we'll cover is a culmination of like ideas and thoughts and work and efforts that have been put together over the years, really, to make kind of a comprehensive interviewing skills presentation here. And so just a shout out to my team. They're fantastic, and I would not have all of this amazing material to present to you without each of them. And the best part about all of that is you all have access to our services at any given time. I'll go over how to access those services at the end. You'll get our contact info, and so you'll be able to talk with us anytime you need to about interviews, resumes, any career-related topics that you have. But for today, we're going to focus in on interview skills and how to elevate your interview skills to get the job done. So what we're going to do is work our way through. I want to take kind of a chronological approach to the interview. And so we'll start with how are we going to go kind of preparing for an interview? What are we going to go do during an interview? And then how are we going to end that interview? What are we going to do afterwards to make the best impression possible? So all of those things are what we're going to cover today. But I want to start with talking about the purpose of the interview. And so let's jump into the content. And again, like Emily said, please feel free to ask questions throughout. You can use the Q&A function to do that. And then we'll pause kind of halfway through and I'll address some of those questions. And then at the end, we'll break again for questions too. So please feel free to ask questions as we go, and we'll make sure we get those addressed. I'd really like to talk about the purpose of an interview as a two-way street. There are two different perspectives that are happening when we talk about an interview. And most of the time, what happens is most people will view the interview as a one-way thing. They are asking me questions to ascertain whether I am going to be a good candidate for the job. But don't forget that you are also there to ask them questions to ascertain whether they are a good fit for you, because you have to go and work for them if they choose to offer you a job. The other thing I like to emphasize is this. At the end of the day, it's actually your decision as the interviewee whether you take the job or not. Yes, they make the decision as to whether to offer you the position, but you actually have that final say of, yes, I would like that job. Thank you for offering it to me. And no, I don't think so. I'm not seeing a good fit between the two of us. So again, remember that is the existing relationship, that it is a back and forth and it is conversational. And there are things that you also are looking to gain as far as information is concerned from that interview. It's not just an interrogation, essentially, right? We don't want to view it as that. It's a back and forth. It's a conversation, and there's information and interviewing being done almost on both sides of the spectrum, right? Now, generally speaking, they're the one asking most of the questions, and you're the one providing most of the answers. But you can gain a lot of information from how that interview goes, what types of questions they ask. And then, of course, when you get the opportunity at the end to ask your own questions, what questions you choose to ask, and we'll talk about that at the end, really will play a large role in how much information are you getting from them in order to be able to make your determination as to whether they're a good fit for you. If you think about it, you're going to be spending, arguably, if it's a full-time position, 40 hours plus a week with that company, with those people. You want to make sure that that's a good fit for you as well. If you have kind of the luxury of, options within your job search process, right? So just be aware of that. Remember that the interview is a two-way street. Overall, right, your purpose as a candidate is to elaborate on your skills, your experiences, and your abilities as they relate to the position and the overall fit of the company. And we'll talk about kind of how are we going to maneuver through that and what types of research do we want to do in order to know that we're presenting ourselves in a way that's a good fit for that company, right? You also, again, are going to gather information about the company and about the position to make sure that's a good fit for you. On their side, relatively standard. You kind of know what they're looking for. They want to make sure that you have the ability to perform the job functions. And beyond that, are you a fit for both kind of the company culture they're trying to put together, as well as the team they're trying to put together, the team that you might be working on, right? I think one of the important things to remember about an interview is that they already know, for the most part, that you can do the job. That's not really the question that they're looking to answer when you get to the interview portion, because they've already addressed that question with your application materials, your resume, your cover letter, whatever other information that you've submitted to them that got you the interview. They've already looked at that and said, okay, it's worth our time to have a conversation with this person as a candidate, right? So remember, they're already interested in you. So your job doesn't necessarily have to be to convince them to be interested in you. They're already interested, right? And that you can take to the bank. That's a nice confidence booster going into an interview, because they're not interviewing everyone that submitted applications. In fact, they're interviewing probably a very small percentage of the total applications that they actually received. And so if you're getting an interview, even if it's just a first round interview, you've already made quite a cut. Like lots of people haven't made that stage. And so they're already interested in you. And so now you want to become the most interesting candidate, right? I'll caveat all of this with, I don't think too much about the fact that it's a competitive process. It is a competitive process. You are against other people who are in the pool, but you can't control those other people. You can't control their backgrounds. You can't control how they interview. You can't control anything about that part of the process. So your objective is to put your best foot forward, to present your skills, abilities, accomplishments, and your unique story, because everyone's story is different, and how you choose to portray and view your story will come across in the interview as either being blasé because you think it's blasé, or as being unique and exciting because you think it's unique and exciting. And this is something I think that gets overlooked by a lot of people, because your own story becomes kind of boring to you, right? That's just kind of a natural thing to have happen. But don't forget that your story is not boring to me. It's not boring to the hiring manager. It's not boring to the people that you're interviewing with, because we haven't lived that story. We don't know your story yet, right? And so when you go into an interview, and when you go into even networking situations and other spaces where you're going to be telling your story, don't make that common error of assuming that you're boring when you're not. That's just, no one is, especially if you consider that people don't know you, people don't know your story, people don't know your experiences. It's exciting to learn about people's story. Reviewing resumes is a really fun thing that we get to do in the Career Services Office. And one of the reasons it's really fun is because we get to see people's unique backgrounds. And oftentimes when you're reviewing a resume, they're like, oh yeah, like I did this and this and this. And I'm like, well, no, you did this and this and this. Like you did really cool things. And I want you to have that attitude coming at an interview as well, and a resume, because those are the things that are going to help set you apart as a unique candidate going into the process. All right, let's jump to preparing for the interview. I touched on some of these things on the previous slide. Know yourself and know the company. There's two pieces of research to be done before an interview, and some of it you've done already. You've done a little bit of company research because you've obviously done enough to apply for the job. So you've looked at the job description of the company and determined that they were worth your time in applying to their position. So you know a little bit about the company already, and hopefully you did enough research to be able to kind of tailor your cover letter, tailor your resume to that particular company and to that particular position. So you've got a little bit of the research part done on the company, hopefully. You also have done some of the research on yourself because you've created a resume, you've created application materials, and so you've been able to kind of reflect on your experiences and abilities and put them into the context of what is going to be most valuable to that particular company. We want to expand upon this before the interview. We want to know all that we can about the company and industry trends as well. What happens if just conversation comes up? Do you know what's happening in their industry? What's happening, with the trends, with their competitors, even maybe, although we're probably not going to talk about that very much, but what do you know about what's happening with the products that they've been creating, maybe even legislation that's been impacting that, world events that have been impacting that. So industry trends and knowledge around what's happening with that industry, and then specifically the company as well. And the company part is where you're going to start to be able to set yourself apart from other people. If you understand and know that their company is on a certain trajectory or they're working towards a certain thing, that's going to lend you credibility in that interview. Because if you can even as an informal part before or after the interview, as you're having conversations, just be able to talk about their company with them and what you know about them, that's going to come across very positively for you, because other people aren't going to necessarily do that. They're just going to be there to do the interview, to answer the questions. And if you can show that you really know their company, that's going to be huge for you. There's a couple key things that I will mention about company research that hopefully will be helpful to you. Know their mission statement, know their values. If they have those, if they are listed on the website and you can find them, memorize their mission statement, write it down, have it with you somewhere. I actually used to, one of the companies that I used to work with when I was at a previous institution, we knew that company would ask about their mission statement. And so it was basically, if you didn't know their mission statement going into the interview, that was a huge red flag for that company. There are companies out there like that. Know their mission statement, know their values, look that stuff up, because that can be really powerful when you can show how you mix with their mission, how you agree with their mission, how your experiences will help augment and further their mission. Those are all the things that companies are looking for that will set you apart from people who just can do the job, right? Again, don't forget, I already kind of know you can do the job if I'm giving you an interview. So now I'm looking for those extra pieces. Are you really invested in my company? And I'll tell you this, almost every time, I will take somebody who is excited and passionate about my company over somebody who might even be more qualified for the job. If you could both do the job, maybe someone is a little more qualified, but their looks they come across as just being there to get the job and do the job, I might drop down to someone who's less qualified, maybe doesn't bring the whole package, the whole skills, abilities. Maybe they're a little bit lower on that scale, but they're really excited about the company and they really want to work at this place. That's the kind of person I want working for me, right? So that's the kind of person you want to portray yourself as in the interview, someone who's really excited about their company, someone who knows it already, who's put in the time, who's done the research. So that is where you want to go with your company research to be able to set yourself apart from other people. Don't forget to plan your professional attire, whether you're going to be virtual or in person, and we'll cover that in a couple of slides here in a little bit more detail. Review the job description. If you don't have a copy of the job description, and this is actually a common problem, you'll apply to the job and then the job will get pulled off of the website and you'll be like, oh crap, where'd that job description go? Now I have an interview and I need it. Request it. It's totally fine to request a copy of the job description. A lot of the times they'll provide it to you, or you'll have it through an applicant tracking system or something. But if you don't hesitate to ask for that job description, because you want that. Not only have you used it to customize your resume, to customize your cover letter to that job description, but now you want to be able to customize how you practice and how you prepare for your interview to that job description as well. What are the keywords they use, right? Very, very similar to the questions that you would have asked on your resume as you were tailoring your resume to them. What are the keywords they use? What are those minimum qualifications? What are those preferred qualifications? How am I going to address those and talk to those in my interview? So there's a T approach to this that we talk about with resumes, which is list out all of the things that you see in the job description, from minimum quals to keywords and skills that they're looking for, and then cross-reference that with, what are the skills and abilities that I bring to the table? Do I match with these? What are my stories is the question you're asking, right? In the resume, it's a little more cut and dry because you're putting it together in a pretty resume-esque format. In the interview, you get to kind of come up with stories behind those experiences and examples that you have. And so now you can take it a little bit further. If they're going to ask about my communication skills, what story do I want to tell them about that, right? Not just where did I get my communication skills, but let's give a specific example of how I've utilized those communication skills in the past. And we'll talk about how to use maybe the STAR method as kind of a process for being able to tell a story in that way. But really, when it comes down to it, answering most interview questions is just storytelling. So if you know your stories and you know the job description and the company, usually you're going to have a pretty good opportunity to be able to tell those stories in a way that relates to them and makes you come across as a very good candidate. Practice questions that you might get asked. This is something that you can do with friends in front of a mirror, or that is what Career Services is here for. So again, I'll give you all of our contact info and how you can get in touch with us at the end. We're literally here to do that. We can go over kind of practice interview stuff as far as just prep and how to prepare and what your interview is going to look like. And we can also do full-blown kind of mock or practice interviews with you, where we'll go in character and be the company that you're going to have an interview with and do our best to kind of ask questions along the lines of that industry or even that company if you provide us with that information. And then we'll be in interview mode and then break from that and be able to debrief and provide you with kind of feedback on how you did with some of the questions and things like that. And typically, I don't want to intimidate people, but I always try to make my mock interviews pretty challenging because I want your practice with me to be easier than when you're actually doing it with the company. I've had people come back and tell me that, like, oh man, like your interview was really hard and my actual interview was really easy. And I'd be like, perfect, that's exactly how it was supposed to be. That's what I was trying to do. And so I like to kind of throw some challenging questions out there to make sure that you're thinking on your toes, and then be able to provide you with some feedback on those things. So please feel free to utilize our resources from a practice standpoint, because we'd love to help you with preparing for your interview. Prepare questions that you're going to ask an employer. Again, we'll talk to that at the very end. And then if you need to, depending on the timeline of the process for that interview, update your resume if you've done something or accomplished something that you want to add to your resume potentially, or a reference sheet if they're asking for it. There is an opportunity maybe to bring some of that stuff up depending on timeline. Some of these processes move much too fast to ever need to do that. But in case it's an elongated process or it's something where you've gone through maybe several rounds of interviews and something has changed and you're like, oh, I'd actually like to submit this new thing that I learned, then you can bring that up potentially or resubmit a resume at some point during the interview process as well. Practice, practice, practice. And again, this is where that's what we're here for. Utilize your network, utilize your friends and family potentially to practice. You can practice with us as much as you need to. There's no limit to how much you kind of do that, but it's always nice to get different perspectives and different feedbacks. And so if you know someone who works in the field, that can be hugely impactful to getting some practice, right? But again, schedule a mock interview with us. We're happy to help with that. And we're more than willing to, again, get into character, be the company that you are interviewing with, and try to imitate that to the best of our abilities. We'll never be able to know all the questions you might get asked, but we can at least provide you with some kind of tailored experience to help you alongside that. Check dates, times, locations, and names, if you can, of interviewers. This can be really handy. If you can do a quick LinkedIn search, find out a little bit more about the specific even people that you're interviewing with. You don't want to go too far with this, okay? I will say, if you know too much about the people you're interviewing with, that can come across in a certain way as well. And so you want to collect basic information about the people you're interviewing with that might help you resonate with them in some way, shape, or form. If you have their LinkedIn profile memorized, that might not come across the way you want to, but if you know some basic information about kind of their job history or how long they've been with the company or something like that, that could be useful to you throughout the process of the interview. I one time was interviewing for a position where one of the interviewers had a research background, and I happened to have a commonality as far as what they were interested in, and we had kind of researched some of the same things. And so I was able to bring that up and have a conversation, completely side conversation about that particular interview, that particular research topic. And so that was helpful to me, right? If I wouldn't have looked that up, I may not have known that. Dates, times, and locations are important. Make sure you know the date, make sure you double check the date, put it in multiple locations on your phone, in your email calendar, whatever it is. You don't want to miss the date and the time. And locations are important. I always suggest this. I don't know how many people actually end up doing it, but if you're going to an in-person on-site interview, do a trial run of getting there at the time that you would be normally getting there. And you can get Google Maps it or whatever maps program that you use, but make sure you do it at the time of your interview because traffic changes throughout the day. And so you might think like, oh, like I looked it up and it says I can get there in 20 minutes. Turns out that your interview is during a time when it actually takes 40 minutes to get there because traffic is bad. So give yourself ample time and maybe even practice getting there and back. If you're interviewing in a larger metropolitan area where parking could be a potential issue, if they haven't provided you with the opportunity of parking on site or where you might park, make sure that you have that arranged. I used to work with students who were in kind of more rural situation. And when they would go to a big city to interview, that was like completely new to them. They were like, oh, like I have to find parking somewhere. You don't just park on the road necessarily. And so this was something that I think is important. You want to make sure that you're for on-sites 10 to 15 minutes early. And then if you're earlier than that, don't walk into the business. Don't walk into the company yet because they won't know what to do with you, right? You're like half an hour early and they're like, sit in the lobby, I guess. No one is ready for you. So 10 to 15 minutes early is plenty as far as like walking in, and then turn off your phone. Best line of advice, just turn it off. Just off your phone. We don't need it on. We don't need it on vibrate even. Just shut it down, really be able to focus in on your interview. Now, if you're preparing for a virtual interview, or a phone interview, although virtual is a little different, make sure that you go through kind of similar processes, but it's a little bit different. And we'll see this a lot now, right? There's a lot of virtual interviews. There's a lot of phone interviews, particularly in your first rounds as you're getting screened maybe by HR or other things before you end up in the panel or with the hiring manager or something like that, right? So there's the on-site components, and sometimes you'll get those right away, and then there's sometimes their first round might be virtual, sometimes it might be phone, and sometimes the whole process might be virtual depending on the type of job that you're interviewing for. For phone interviews, know your phone. Make sure that you know where you're getting good signals, where that might be bad, and have a space, right, where you know that it's going to be kind of a quiet environment where you can really be engaged in the phone piece of that. Don't be in too small of a room where there's echoes and weird things going on. And you can always test that, and we can help you test that if you want to. If you're practicing for a phone interview, we'll do the mock part of it on phone, right, or virtual for virtual. Test your equipment beforehand if you're doing a virtual interview. This is important. Emily and I were on, for instance, 15 minutes before this just to make sure everything was working. We were adjusting lighting. We were changing little things here and there. Just to make sure that everything was the way we wanted it. So do that, right? Test your equipment, make sure you've got everything working. I like to reboot your computer the day before or the morning of or something like that in case something weird happens and a Windows update pops up right in the middle of your interview. There's weird things that could happen. So for virtual, just make sure you've got everything situated. Pay attention to the details behind you in your background because that's important. Is it distracting? Is it too much? Are you blending into the background? And that can impact your choice of professional attire as well. Make sure that your clothing is not just faded into whatever you're in, that the whole of yourself pops from the shoulders up on that virtual space, but not pops in a bad way. We don't want any like neon greens or bright pinks or things like that. So, you want color is fine, but keep it muted, earthy tones, things like that. Things you would actually wear to an in-person interview. I don't give a lot of differentiating advice between what you would wear to an in-person as to what you would wear to a virtual interview, other than make sure that it doesn't blend in with your background or clash too much with your background. Check your lighting. Emily, yeah?
Dr. Vaartstra, I was, in terms of the technical space, there's one question in the chat and it has to do with preparing for the interview. And I wanted to hop in if you were done with the virtual piece. So
yeah,
I'm
go
sorry.
For it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Great. So the question in the chat that came to me, when you're preparing for the interview and you're doing the research about a company, what if you can't find many reviews about a company or an organization, or they don't list their mission and vision? What are some strategies for going around about that? And then there's an additional piece to that question. So in addition to that, so if you don't have access to information, how do you prepare for that type of interview if you can't find it online?
Yeah, well, really good questions. And really, you're limited by what the company shares, right? Now, if you're willing to do a little bit of work, you have the ability to dig a little bit if you want to. From a networking standpoint, do you know anyone who knows somebody, right? And so you might be able to dig for some additional information if you know someone who works there, if you know someone who has, maybe done business with that particular company before. So there are ways around maybe them not having a website or not having a very in-depth website. So you can try to go the networking route to find some of that information. Really, there can't be any expectation of you knowing them if they're not providing that information anywhere where people could find it, right? And so I wouldn't overly fret about like, oh, I didn't find this and that about a company. If it's not available for you to find, then they can't really expect you to be able to find it. Now, if you can do a little digging and find it, maybe it comes across even more impressive. But again, you don't want to, I wouldn't say like spend a ton of time like digging through contacts, and you bet your best kind of preparing for the interview and making sure that you come across the way you want to, rather than spending all of your time trying to dig through where do I find out about this particular company. So if you don't find that information really readily, you can maybe poke and prod a little bit to see if you know anyone and maybe get a little bit of that, but it's not imperative to have that information necessarily, because you can always fall back to the job description, right? You'll always have the job description to fall back to. There's usually at least a little company description, oftentimes in the job description. And if it's not there, then you're really just focused on the job description itself and the job rather than the company. You should know enough about the company to be able to still relate to them in a way where you know their service or their product or what they do, right? So you can still make those kind of ties, even if there's not an active mission statement. And some companies just don't have them, like especially small companies. Oftentimes, maybe they don't have a really active website. There's not a lot of information on them. And so sometimes you won't be able to find that information, which is fine. Again, you can always fall back on there are pieces of information you have that you can still think about and reflect on to be able to try to tie yourself to the different services and what you're excited about them for, right? That's the bottom line question. What is it about them that excites you? How do you create those ties to that?
And I appreciate that. And again, as you mentioned, you're still going to have pieces of information in the job description. So thank you so much for taking a moment to answer that.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Great question. Other things for virtual space. I will oftentimes say as much as 10 to 15 minutes early at an on-site is probably your best bet. Really about 5 minutes for a virtual is probably good. Most of the time there's a waiting room, but I caveat that with sometimes they're not set up that way. And so you actually press the button and you're there right when you hit that button. So you want to be prepared for that just in case it happens, which is why I typically won't sign in or click the Zoom link until about 5 minutes before, just in case you're there. All of a sudden, half the interviewers aren't there or they're still conversing about something else. And then all of a sudden you're there in their meeting. In a perfect world, they would have it set up so that they would let you in and you would just sit in the nice little waiting room, preparing and kind of going through kind of your stories as you're waiting. But on the off chance that you automatically pop up in that room, that way you're not there 15 minutes early, you're only there 5 minutes early. So I think 5 minutes is a good buffer for the virtual space as opposed to longer than that. But there's a little personal preference in there. I don't want to, socially, I'm like, ooh, I don't want to like put myself in that situation where I'm sitting in a Zoom room where the interview doesn't start for another 15 minutes and I'm already there. So I'll tend to do that 5 minute buffer for the virtual space, whereas I'll go a little longer on the on-site, because there's almost always a lobby that I can sit in, or I can wait right outside of that space and know that I'm there and ready to go. But for virtual, I think 5 minutes is good. Let's see. I think that takes me to dress for success. So I'll cover one more slide here, and then I'll stop for questions again and see if we have anything else to chat about. So if you have questions, feel free to use that Q&A function or the chat to be able to get those in, and then we'll take a quick break after this slide before we dive into kind of the during and after the interview sections. Dressing for success is important. I have a very basic rule for dressing for an interview. Dress one step up from what you would wear on the job. So whatever you would wear at that workspace, take it one level higher than that. Now, this is really easy For men, if you're dressing in just traditional male clothing, you have like your baseline is like a polo, right? Like business casual is a polo. You're almost never going to wear a polo to an interview. You're almost always going to go with the button-up shirt. The next step up from that is putting the tie on. The next step up from that is putting a jacket on, right? So there's like a progression of like you add more basically to your outfit as you get more formal basically in that instance. I always say dress one step up from what you would wear on the job, because some occupations, it would be very awkward if you showed up in a full suit to that job interview. I used to work with ag students a lot, or natural resources students as well. And if your job is going to have you out in the field, and the most dressed up the people in that office get is a polo, and you show up in a full suit, you've created a discrepancy between you and them, even at the level of dress, showing that maybe you don't quite understand their company, right? So you've kind of separated themselves from the culture of that company. There at one point, I knew about a company, I think it was in Silicon Valley in the San Fran area, where they were very like anti-tie at that particular company. They actually had like a wall of ties. They would like take your tie if you showed up to their company, and they'd like pin it to the wall. So again, a little bit of research goes a long way, so that you know what's going to fit in with their company culture. Again, baseline is what would you wear when you're working on that job? Dress a step up from that. Whatever that is in your industry, that's kind of the generic kind of advice that I give. And that looks different across different genders. That looks different across different industries. So how you choose to do that is really up to you. But you want it to be professional, right? Business casual is like bare minimum. And then you always want to step up from that typically. So again, we can maybe talk about the details of that if there are specific questions on it. But again, bottom line, dress one step up from what you would wear on the job, and that's almost always going to cover you as far as making a good impression with your professional dress. Couple of things you might want to bring with you to an interview: extra copies of materials. If you're going in person, it might be nice to have a couple copies of your resume, maybe your cover letter. Resume is probably more important if you're making copies of things. Work samples, if your job is maybe more design oriented, or things you may have submitted an online portfolio or something like that, you might take some of your best work samples with you in that kind of instance. The nice thing about that is if some of the interviewers maybe don't have copies of your resume, it's really slick if like one guy is like looking at your resume and then the rest of the panel is maybe not looking at your resume, and you can just like slide them over a resume. Like there's a little nuance there that feels really nice if you have an extra copy of your resume. So you can bring those with you if you want. Also, they could just be your reference sheet. If no one needs it, great. You have it sitting in front of you. You've got your stories, at least your baseline stories are right in front of you when you're interviewing. So that can be helpful as well. Water, although a lot of companies will provide it, but just in case, you might want to bring water. Mints, if it's necessary, not gum, mints. Pens or pencils if you need something to write with, a pad folio or notebook. And that kind of depends on who you are as an interviewer, as a person as well. Some people really need and want to write things down. They might jot down the question, or at least pieces of the question, so that you can reference it, and that's totally fine to do. In fact, sometimes it's really helpful. But if that's not who you are, if that takes you out of the moment, then don't do that, right? I think you need to understand how it is that you interview the best. Again, and that's how practice comes into play there as well. How do you function best? Do you need to write the question down? Do you not need to write the question down because it distracts you from being engaged in the process? The interview is often much more conversational than you think it will be. And so if you're taking yourself out of that, and it takes you out of the conversational mode, then maybe you don't want to write stuff down. But also sometimes that's really helpful for people. So you really want to figure out what works best for you there. If you're interviewing virtually, a copy of the job description sitting in front of you, or if you have multiple screens on a different screen in front of you, can be very helpful because you can reference it, right? And then again, any materials you submitted, so that as they're asking about it, you have the ability to reference those things. And you actually have a little bit more flexibility with that in a virtual space, because you can be present on Zoom and have some things in front of you, as long as you're not shuffling papers constantly or looking at different screens all the time. That's okay to have some things there to reference in front of you. Don't overly reference them, right? Because you want the interview to feel more natural, not like you're looking at a piece of paper with all your answers on it, reading to them. That's not really what you're going for, but at least you have those around you to reference if you need to. Okay. Questions so far?
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
It's so funny you mentioned the pad of paper. If you need that, and I mentioned, yeah, I need that in my interviews so that I can jot down the names of the interviewers so I don't forget who I'm talking to. That's
Yep.
just and again, that goes to your suggestion of knowing who you are. I know I'm terrible with names, and I know that I want to be more successful in those scenarios. So having that piece of paper where I can write down those names is absolutely more more successful in my experience. But again, as you mentioned, knowing who you are.
Yeah.
So the question is, are you going to cover maybe some tips on how to make a great impression within the first few minutes? And I'm going to just mention this next piece of this individual's question. For example, when they say, tell me a little bit about yourself, which
Yep.
I'm not quite sure if they're asking those questions in interviews anymore. You can tell me, you're the expert.
Yep.
But
we're gonna get into that in just a couple slides.
okay, cool. So
Yes.
I'm glad we're going to touch on that. And I agree. I mean, some people have really strong work history, but they're not quite sure how to weave those into the questions.
Yeah.
So let me scroll down. Let me see if there was another question that popped up since you're going to address that. Okay. Nope. Since you're going to address that, that's all the questions for right now.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Emily. I appreciate that. And good questions. And yes, we'll talk about here in just a moment, kind of those first impressions and specifically kind of what types of questions you can anticipate and practice and how to address maybe a couple of those types of questions that we see. So we'll jump into that as we get into kind of the during the interview portion here. And again, keep the questions coming. We'll stop again at the end. I will do my best to leave time at the end. I like to talk and I have lots of information I want to share. So I'll do my best to leave enough time to address questions, and we'll make sure we get you answers regardless to those. Okay, let's move on to during the interview. It's at this point where I always encourage, and it's actually the second to last bullet there, trust your preparation. The last thing that you want to do is walk into an interview questioning whether you've done enough to be ready. That defeats the whole purpose of all the preparation that you did. And so I want you to be in a place where when you're walking through the door, when you're pressing on the Zoom link, when you're answering the phone, whatever it is, that you are confident in the prep work that you've done. And this is not the time to question whether you've done enough. Trust the preparation that you did and go into it with the confidence that you did the things you wanted to do in order to prepare for that interview, right? So trust the preparation and then the work that you did. That will cause you to have an increased level of confidence going into that space, right? There's a couple things that I always like to point out. Some of them seem obvious. Smiling is important. If you were like me, and I actually got this comment when I used to work on campus, when I was walking to and fro places, I apparently look very angry normally. My thinking face is apparently angry. People would stop me on campus and be like, "Man, are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just going over there." And then they're like, "Oh, okay, like he seems fine." But my natural face apparently is not smiling. So in an interview, I have to be very clear and direct about the fact that I want to be smiling during that process. I want to make eye contact with people. So again, this comes back around to kind of knowing yourself, making yourself into that personable, friendly person that you normally are, or that you want to come across as, even though you might be in a heightened state of stress. There's stuff on the line, right? And so you're going to be experiencing a little bit of those stress or anxiety symptoms. So take the moment, make sure that you've got that smile on your face, and be comfortable in the space you are, at least as comfortable as you can be. If you're in person, a firm handshake is still relatively common, although some people now may be offering the knuckle bump or something else. And so be aware of kind of what you're offered. There was a time, especially during the height of the pandemic, where shaking hands was like a big no, and we weren't doing any of that stuff. It's coming all back around. But read the situation. If you're offered a hand, great, then you've got the ability to do a handshake. If you're not a person who likes to do handshakes, maybe you're going to be forward and maybe you offer the knuckles or something, your alternative to a handshake in advance if that's something that you're not comfortable with. But most of the time, the firm handshake is still in play during an in-person interview for the most part. Be friendly and professional to everyone. This is one of the actually biggest pieces of advice that I will give people. You are interviewing from the moment you wake up that morning, all the way through the time when you get home. after your interview, you are in interview mode. I love to tell this story, and my colleagues have heard it, and some of you maybe have even heard it. I was at a conference and I was talking to someone who happened to be an administrative assistant at a company that was at this conference. And we got to talking about what I do and working in career advising. And she was like, "Oh, I have the story I have to tell you because of the work you do." And I was like, "Okay, cool. Tell me the story." And she told me the story about how she was driving to work one morning, and about 3 intersections before her place of employment, she ended up at a 4-way stop with some other cars, and she was brutally cut off by a young driver, who then proceeded to reach out the window, make gestures towards her, and yell certain words that were not very friendly. That person then sped off, and she was like, "Wow, that was not the greatest experience. I'm just going to go to work." Lo and behold, she pulls up into the parking lot of her work, and guess who's sitting in their car outside of her company? That same driver. She goes, "Oh, that's interesting." She goes into work as if she would any other day. She's an administrative assistant working at the front desk. And again, lo and behold, 5 minutes later, that young individual walked into the office for an interview. And yes, you can bet that that particular person was probably great during the interview, probably very friendly. But that experience was like, that person did not get the job. She was like, "Yeah, I told my management about my experience that morning with that particular individual and what type of individual they would potentially be hiring onto their team. And they declined to offer that person a position." Be aware of your actions at all times when you're in an interview, when you're in a job search process. Everyone has an impact. Everyone has a say in that building and around that building for job interviews, right? The way that you treat every single person in that building when you walk into that building, those people all could potentially be asked for their opinion of you, and that could contribute to your potential hire or not hire or offer at that particular company. So be aware of all of those things when you're there. Couple more things to keep in mind. I've emphasized this a couple of times, but interviews are professional, but they're conversational. Again, it's not an interrogation. It's meant to be a little bit more free-flowing even than most people think. And so keep in mind that there is a little bit of back and forth. A little bit of humor is typically fine. Again, read the room. Maybe they're not a humorous place, and maybe you're not in a humorous profession. And so maybe, again, read the people that you're with. But if they're kicked back a little bit, if they're a little more informal, then you can be a little more informal. And I say a little more informal. It's still an interview, and you still want to have a very formal air to you, even if they're pretty laid back. You want to match that to a degree, but you're still going to keep that level of, it is an interview, it is professional, but making it conversational is perfectly acceptable. Oftentimes the best interviews are very conversational in nature. And there's a little bit of back and forth, and there's reactions, and there's nonverbals, and all of those things take place during those conversations. Be positive and convey positive responses. I don't know why, but people have a tendency to remember the negative things, and then maybe they tell a negative story in response to a question. As you're practicing and knowing your stories, make sure that you practice and that your stories, the end of your stories, are positive, right? Don't speak negatively about former employers, even if they ask you the question, "Why are you moving on from your current position?" And the reason you're moving on from your current position is because you're not having a great experience where you are right now. That doesn't need to be the reason that you're moving on, right? Come up with something more forward thinking. I'm ready for a move in my career. I'm looking for a change in environments as far as more responsibilities or growth. Make it positive rather than the actual reason might be, well, like, I'm not liking where I'm at. That's fine. That can be your reason. But in the interview, make sure we're keeping it positive and forward thinking, right? In the interview, focused on what your future employer might offer you rather than what issues you might be experiencing at a former employer. Think before you speak and listen carefully to questions. Ask for clarification. Again, big piece of advice here. If you're going to take something away, pauses are okay. You do not have to launch right into your answer immediately as soon as the question gets asked. You don't have to be talking right away. I would much rather have someone take 10, 15, maybe even 20 seconds, although a 20-second break will feel like ages. Even 10 seconds will feel like ages in an interview. But if you take that time to think through your answer, what you actually want to say, pick your best story to tell, what will happen is, yes, you might spend 10, 15 seconds thinking and putting together your answer, But if you do that and then give me a minute and a half, 2 minutes of like really concise, really specific, tailored answer to a question, that's so much better than you spending a minute just kind of rambling and trying to figure out where you're going to go before you actually get to the answer to my question. And then you've wasted a minute of your time and my time where you've not really given me anything useful, right? So pauses are okay. I'll caveat that with this. If they ask you the tell me about yourself question and you have to pause to think about how to tell me about yourself, like then we reach a problem, right? So there are certain questions where you should be able to launch right into them without having to pick a story to tell. And so if you're pausing at every question, that can be problematic, but be okay with pauses, be okay with putting your thoughts together, picking your answer to the question that you want that you're being asked, and then being able to express that. There's a bunch of different ways to get to that point, right? Thinking face is one of them, right? If you put thinking face on, then they'll know you're thinking about a response. You can articulate that. And in fact, if you're on the phone, you will have to articulate that because they cannot see thinking face through the phone. So it's okay to say, I'm just going to take a moment to think about my answer to that. Take your moment, collect your thoughts, and then move in, right? Ask for clarification. If you don't understand a question or if you're not sure what they're trying to get at, feel free to ask for reclarification of that question. They can ask it maybe in a different way. That's all fine. It is totally okay to ask that. Again, I'll caveat that with don't do that on every question. Make sure that you're paying enough attention that you can grasp most of the questions. But if there's a question you're confused on, don't try to take a guess at it, right? Ask for clarification. That's totally fine. We're avoiding filler words as much as we can. This requires a little bit of practice and something that even I still struggle with, likes, ums, us. Try to use pauses instead of using those words. It's very challenging. It's something that we all work on quite a bit. Don't be overly concerned with this. But if you find that you struggle with it, it's something to work on putting that pause in rather than using a word to move on. And that's something that can be practiced as well. Use specific examples and quantify numbers. And I know I'm running out of time, so I want to keep this moving along. This is very relevant to your resume, right? Be able to reflect on your resume. Your resume, it's used to hopefully some specific examples. You've quantified some things. Be able to utilize those in your examples as you go in that direction as well. Know your industry-specific buzzwords so you can bring those up, right? Okay, so to address the commonly asked interview questions, know your stories. We've already talked about that. Here are some commonly asked questions, and there are lists upon lists upon lists upon lists of commonly asked interview questions. Typically, questions fall into several kind of buckets. The tell me about yourself question is almost always the very first question that you'll get asked. So being prepared to answer that question is a very good idea. The tell me about yourself question is best answered, in my opinion, as a chronological retelling of your professional and academic history. It's not tell me about yourself from the time you were born to where you grew up, to where you moved, to the brothers and sisters you had. Like that's not relevant to me. Now, I want to get to know you, but I want to get to know you from a professional and an academic standpoint, right? So what are the things about you that are relevant to me who is trying to make a hiring decision about you, right? Those include things like your work history, places that you've been, the path that your career has taken so far, whether that be short or long, how your academics have included in that, right? Where have you been? How have you developed as a professional that make you a great candidate for my position? Here's my favorite way to end the tell me about yourself question. Them. The next thing in my story is you, is this position, right? Everything that I've done up until this point, my academics, my experiences, all of the pieces that I bring to the table lead to you. And so I'll end the tell me about yourself question with them. Throw it right back to them, bring it all around, connect them right into your story right away. That's my favorite way to end, to answer the tell me about yourself question, right? Keep it relevant to them. And you can put that statement after almost any question, right? Tell me about yourself in relation to this position or company. How does your previous experience relate to this position or company? What are your major strengths and weaknesses in relation to this position or company, right? You could add that phrase to just about any question to give yourself kind of a more narrow view of what's my best or most appropriate answer for this. You'll get other questions like, why are you interested in this position or this company? or down towards the bottom, the why should I hire you question, or why should I hire you over other candidates for this position? And these are very common questions now. You want to have that ability to talk about your story from a unique perspective. The why should I hire you instead of other people? Don't focus on the other people part, right? What makes you a unique candidate for the job? And it's not just that you have the skills and abilities, again, because I already kind of know that, right? What is it about you that makes you a great candidate for this job? And oftentimes that goes back to that passion piece, right? Why are you really excited about working at this place? How can you talk to them about that passion, that excitement that you have for working, not just in the field, but working for them specifically, their company within the field, right? And that's where that company research might come back into play. The other types of questions you might get asked, there's kind of two other buckets that I think are oftentimes asked. That is kind of negatively framed questions. And the other one is situation-based or behavior-based questions, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Negatively framed questions, things like the weaknesses question. Tell me about a time you failed. Talk to me about a challenging situation and how you handled it. Tell me about a time you had a disagreement with a coworker. These are all, in my opinion, negatively framed questions. They're going to poke at something negative. And my mode of operation for answering this is 20% of that question should be addressing the negative. 80% of your answer to that question should be addressing how you worked on that, what you learned from it, all of those different components, right? So the weaknesses question, here's a weakness, a legitimate weakness that I have. They want honesty. Temper that. If organizational skills are a key facet in the job description and you're telling them your major weakness is organizational skills, that's not the right weakness to tell them about. Okay, so a real weakness, but one that is not a fundamental good thing, skill they're looking for in that position. Give them their weakness. Then you move on to, here's what I do to cope with that weakness. Here's what I've learned about myself that helps me not experience that weakness. Here's why that weakness is not a problem for you. Same thing with the failure question. What did you learn from that failure? How do you keep from experiencing that failure again in the future? So your focus becomes future oriented and problem solving, right? In those negatively framed questions. Okay. I know I'm going fast and I know I'm running out of time. The behavior-based or situational questions are the most common questions that you'll get asked. These are the questions, tell me about a time when, in this situation, what would you do, right? Those are very common questions. The best way to frame those, if you're not a great storyteller, you don't really know how should I frame those questions in, the STAR method is what you want to utilize for this. And I'll include a handout in these slides so that Emily can send those to you. So you'll have a little handout on the STAR method as well. It's basically just a formula for what do I talk about and in what order if I'm trying to answer a behavior-based question. So if I'm asked the tell me about a time when question, how do I tell my story? Describe the situation that you were in, right? Probably pulling from your resume. What's that experience that you had? What task did you need to accomplish? What was your responsibility to get done in that particular situation? What actions did you take? And the tendency here is to have a team-like aspect. Oh, well, we did this. And I'm like, well, I'm not really interested in what we did. I want to know you're a team player. I want to know you can work on a team, and that's all good. But for the purposes of this, like, I need to know what did you do? What was your role in that, right? So again, focus on the you of that. And the most important part of the STAR method is the result. And that's typically what people will leave out is they'll tell the STA method. Like, here's a situation, here's what I need to do, and here's what I did. And they're like, and I'm like, okay, cool. Well, did that work? Was it successful? Did you have a good outcome? So bring them all the way to the end, right? What was that result? It also brings such a nice natural close to the question. Like, you tell them what you accomplished or that it was successful, that you worked out that disagreement with the coworker in a positive way, right? That's the end cap you want, is the result part of that question. So this is just, again, a formula for kind of laying that out a little bit. I'm going to move quickly so I can get to questions. At the very end, you get the opportunity to ask some questions. This is where you get to flip that two-way street, right? What information do you want? Here's a list of different questions. You'll have the slides. The one that I'll point to specifically that I really like, what do you like the most about working here? I love to ask this question because I want to ascertain, what is it that keeps you working here? Why are you so excited about being in this company, right? Because I want to grab onto that. Is that something that I also would like about working there, right? I want more information, and that's one of the best ways I think of getting it is just asking them what their perceptions are, right? Ask for business cards, or as Emily mentioned, write down names, right? So that you know who you interviewed with. Or again, if you're virtual, ask for contact information, and that's totally fine to ask for contact information, right? Little tidbit at the bottom here. Don't ask questions about salary and benefits on the first interview, probably not even on the second interview. I would advise that we don't talk salary or benefits until the job offer is actually on the table. That sometimes will get covered beforehand. It really depends on HR practices. And if you have specific questions about that, I'll show you the information for scheduling an appointment with us so we can chat through salary and benefits, because we can talk salary and benefit negotiations as well in career services. So we're happy to answer those questions. But in the interview, it is actually okay even to defer this question. Would love to talk about salary and benefits more when a job offer is on the table. That's an acceptable answer. Sometimes they will push you because their HR rules determine that you have to do something. Do a little bit of research so you know what your general value is going into an interview. That's a good idea. After the interview, send a thank you email. I used to suggest other things. Emails are best. Decisions get made quickly. Send a personalized email if you can, right? And if you ask that question, which is, what do you like best about working there? You can incorporate that into your thank you. Thank you so much for sharing with me that you really love this about the company. That sounds awesome, right? Like, again, keep it maybe more formal than that, but you can make a reference to something you learned about that person in that thank you email that you send. And I would get these sent same day because you never know when they're making decisions about this, and you want that thank you to be a nice little reminder to them about, your interest in the job, right? So notate that. Thank you emails probably relatively soon after the interview process concludes that day. Reflect on your performance. And again, this is where feel free to schedule a debrief with us. You can talk about how that went. We can even review kind of what your answers were and how you could improve. Prepare for a second round interview if that's going to happen. And then again, if you got information, which hopefully you did, about what the follow-up time period looks like for that, make sure that you don't over contact them. Follow up with them. If they said within 2 weeks you'll hear from us and you haven't heard from them, probably a nice time to follow up with them. Remind them that you're still interested in that. So that's something to think about as well. Remember, practice builds confidence. We want to walk into those interviews with confidence. Know your stories, know the company, and you can usually come out with that confidence going into those situations. I left 1 whole minute for questions.
No, oh my goodness, that's actually perfectly fine, because the question that came up was about how to negotiate salary, and you addressed it in terms of the recommendation of not having that happen in the interview process. Are you able to just kind of show us the website of career services, and just so our students can have, and faculty or staff actually as well too, just so they can have a glance of it? Is that something that you're going to walk us through today?
I wasn't, but I can pull it up. All of our contact information is right here. There are multiple ways to access the career services. So if you have access to the NU student portal, there is a handshake chiclet in there. That handshake chiclet, you just sign in using your NU single sign-on credentials. All of our information is within that. The website also has links to Handshake. Handshake is actually where you'll schedule appointments with us, attend our workshops, visit our job or internship board. We have those as well. There's also employer events that take place in Handshake. So all of those things occur within Handshake. If you are an alumni, or if you are a student with an NCU email address, if you're a one-to-one student, email us, call us, we will get you set up. You have full access to the system. You just have to do it in a little bit of a different way. And we can get you that information to make sure that we get you into the system, and you'll have full access once you get in there. But all of our services run through Handshake, and our website will bring you there. The chiclet will bring you there, or the website is right there, nu.joinhandshake.com. You go to that website. Again, you can use your NU single sign-on to be able to jump in from that space as well.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. We actually just, someone in the chat just mentioned they signed up for Handshake, and a few people that are interested in setting up some appointments. And to whoever the person is in the chat that has their interview this week, good luck to you. And
yes.
I really appreciate this coming and sharing the knowledge and your best strategies for being successful in an interview process. You really covered a lot of material today, and I'm really grateful for your services. Until the next time, I hope you all have a great rest of your evening. Thank you again, Matt, and appreciate
thank
you,
you,
Ashley,
everybody.
as well, too. Take care.